All right, thanks everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate everybody taking some time to chat. My name's JP Laqueur, and as Jeff mentioned, I'm a partner and founder of a company called BrandFoundations. We're a firm that specializes in helping companies clarify their higher purpose and articulate it in their brand, and then try to activate it in their culture. And I'm also the chair, as was mentioned, of the Conscious Capitalism chapter of New York City. We're one of about 50 chapters around the globe. And our purpose is to elevate humanity through business. We do that by hosting a number of different events and workshops designed to bring people together, create a community of like-minded, purpose-driven capitalists in our city, and to introduce the ideas of conscious capitalism to the leaders of mid-sized organizations across the tri-state area. When peers and the folks at PSFK asked me to participate this week, I knew it would be relatively easy to tie together today's theme of sustainability with conscious capitalism. The two are obviously somewhat closely related. The bigger challenge was to think about how to do that within the context of what we're all going through right now, right? This pandemic. And I struggled with that. Like most everybody, I've spent probably too much time reading, worrying about the news, and trying to come to grips with events, trying to figure out how we got here and where we're going to go next. Now I'm in the purpose business, so to speak. So I'll share with you that my own personal purpose is to create understanding together. And whether I'm helping in my work day to day a company to see and embrace the story of their brand and culture, or I'm creating space for a thoughtful conversation in a conscious capitalism event, something like this, I always try to make it a collective creative exercise that helps people understand each other and the world around them a little bit better. That's my idea of creating understanding together. And so I went back to that purpose and preparation for this, and I reflected on all the dozens of conversations that I've had over the last month, really, with friends and family and partners and clients. And I saw patterns in how people seem to be understanding this situation and how it might create an opportunity for some positive change, such as the more rapid adoption of conscious capitalism. So that collective impression is what I want to share with you guys today. And when I take a step back from the news daily of this crisis, it seems to me that this is just the latest in a string of slow-moving disasters, right? Where it seems like Mother Nature's trying to get our attention, and has been for a while, and sending us these signals, whether it's wildfires that you can see from orbit because they're so big, or glaciers melting, seas rising, reefs dying, ever more powerful storms, 500-year floods in some areas, decade-long droughts in others, right? We're seeing this, but we haven't been paying attention, or we haven't been listening. We keep driving our SUVs. We're consuming ever more natural resources, running factories and sweatshops to keep the shelves full and consumers happy. And we're generating ever more waste that's piling up in landfills, polluting the groundwater, collecting in the oceans. We're simply too busy working and surviving and sort of living our lives. And that's part of what makes us human. We're not genetically wired to pay attention, as much attention, to the long-term consequences as we are short-term gains. And it's why the whole decision to quarantine ourselves and flatten the curve has been so difficult for some to understand and to adopt. But most importantly, these storms, these floods, these droughts, they're not affecting all of us in the same way or at the same time. So we're going about our business thinking that the time frames are long, that the impacts are small or far away, or some future generation's problem. And we're like the proverbial frog in boiling water. We're not feeling the urgency. We're not hearing Mother Nature's pleas for change. And so she sent us this invisible, silent, swift, merciless little microbe. And I think this is, and I've heard other people say, maybe this is her way of getting our attention, of raising her voice, screaming at us all at once, sort of global earthquake to shake everyone up and get everyone's attention at the same time. And it's a pretty equalizing event that makes no distinction between the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the red state or the blue state. And its broad effects that none of us can really escape, whether that's empty streets or empty shelves, overloaded 911 lines, overrun ICUs, failing healthcare system, and obviously unprecedented economic stoppage and job loss and financial wreckage occurring at a speed and scale that we've never experienced before. And this virus isn't even that lethal. Imagine if the mortality rate were 25% or 30%. And maybe that's what Mother Nature has in store for us next time if we don't pay attention. But as grim as things look right now and are likely to get a little grimmer, I do think it's possible to see some silver linings. There's some ways that people are reacting and the planet's reacting that provide some hope. And so I want to talk a little bit about those. The first is that the planet has already begun to heal itself and sort of rebalance itself as nature does in a pretty rapid and dramatic fashion. No doubt you've all read about the water running clear in Venice, the air cleaner over all of our cities. I've seen videos of people marveling at the sound of birds on Park Avenue again when they happen to walk outside. Now, to be clear, these benefits are not going to last once factories restart, traffic begins running again. But having sort of been stopped dead in our tracks in a matter of weeks, humanity, I think, is getting a really visceral reminder of how beautiful our planet actually is and how much damage we've been doing to it. And that's a good thing. And I think that leads to a mindset change. And it's not just the planet that's adjusting, we're actually changing as well and adjusting. And I think we're appreciating nature more now than ever before. I know I am. In the first few weeks of the quarantine here, I think looking to break the monotony, so many people took to the parks and the recreation paths that we've seen authorities have to actually shut many of them down just to maintain social distancing. And that's only made us appreciate nature and getting outside even more. And I see us appreciating each other more as well. Confined to our homes, families are rediscovering how to spend more quality time together, having movie nights, breaking out board games, cooking dinner together. I've heard all sorts of stories from friends and family and coworkers about that. And even despite these social distancing measures, we're reaching out more frequently, we're connecting more deeply. I've personally found myself picking up the phone and checking in on relatives and friends and contacts that I haven't spoken to in months or sometimes years. I'm FaceTiming with my mom every night rather than just once a week, and she lives 20 minutes away. Probably because she's a nurse, she's 78, and she's still going into the office a couple times a week to triage patients. And it's not just the superficial check-in of, how's everything going? We're actually having longer, deeper conversations, revisiting family stories, laughing, supporting, telling each other how much we love and appreciate another. This is what I see, a deepening of our connection, our slowing down, appreciating one another more. And this pandemic's forcing us to appreciate the little things in life, the stuff that we take for granted, like toilet paper. And I've noticed a lot less fear of missing out, especially with my teenage children. Because let's face it, they're all missing out. Everyone's missing out. We're all in the same boat. And while many people are going to be absolutely economically devastated by this, and there is still tremendous anxiety about what we still have to lose, at the same time, I see a lot of people expressing gratitude for what they still have. Often it's their health, their loved ones, etc. And we're also learning to learn and work and play in new ways. And like many of you, I'm realizing, wow, I can get a lot done in a virtual meeting. A Zoom meeting can be incredibly effective. And you're probably all discovering how much fun you can have with the virtual background features, as I have been. And this technology is working, and it's working amazingly well, right? And it's holding up. Considering the load that we are putting on it, it's pretty incredible. And only imagine how much more difficult this would be if we didn't have these tools and these technologies at our disposal. So will any of these silver linings, these beginnings of a mindset change, actually make a difference? And what will they mean for us going forward? So when this pandemic passes, as it will, I think one of two things are going to happen. We'll either go back to ignoring the warnings and return as quickly as possible to the way we were living, to our status quo, or this could become a tipping point that accelerates our adoption of new frameworks that lead us to a more sustainable world. And the first one that's closest to my heart is conscious capitalism. And while it's still early, I believe that this pandemic and our response to it, some of those mindset changes are already showing an accelerated adoption of some of the principles of this movement. And for those that aren't familiar with it, it was launched with a book called Conscious Capitalism, authored by Raj Sisodia, a business school professor, and John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. And to be absolutely clear, those of us leading this movement are capitalists, first and foremost. We believe that free market capitalism is the most effective and greatest force for organizing the ingenuity, the effort, and the potential of humanity. And it has lifted literally billions of people out of poverty and improved the lives of virtually everyone across the planet. However, we also recognize that it's done so with some really deep and underappreciated costs, including overconsumption of natural resources, a devastating set of financial impacts, massive wealth inequality. All those things aside, we still believe free market capitalism has to be an institution that plays a role in solving these problems, especially because right now we live in an era of very rapidly declining trust in all the other institutions that we have historically relied on, including the government, media, the scientific community, even higher education. Right? We see trust in these institutions plummeting. So capitalism is going to have to play a role. But in order to do so, it's got to evolve. It's got to become more conscious. And this movement is about helping every organization evolve itself in 4 fundamental areas: purpose, culture, leadership, and stakeholders. So I'm going to take a brief look at each of these and share some evidence of where I see the adoption of those slightly being accelerated as a result of this pandemic. The first tenet of this movement is higher purpose. And it's the idea that every organization has to have a reason to exist that's beyond profit. Every business, for-profit business, has to have a reason to exist that goes beyond profit. Ed Friedman, who's a University of Virginia Darden School of Business professor and is an early proponent and supporter of the conscious capitalism movement, is fond of saying that businesses need profit in order to survive, kind of like humans need oxygen in order to survive. But we don't live for oxygen, right? We live to make connections with others, to have great experiences, to love, to share experiences. We just need the oxygen in order to survive. And it's the same with businesses. Businesses have to exist for another reason. They don't exist just to make a profit. On an individual level, this notion of higher purpose, we are dramatically seeing it work every day in the actions of these frontline healthcare professionals, like my mom, who continue to go to work, even at great personal risk, without the right protective equipment. And they're driven by a much higher purpose than a paycheck. And it's certainly not for the hazard pay, because they're not getting any. They're doing this because they want to serve others. They want to alleviate pain and suffering. We're seeing that painfully reminded of it every day. At a corporate level, though, we're seeing it too. We've all probably heard about LVMH and how they switched over some of their manufacturing lines to create from fragrances to create hand sanitizer. What's not widely known is how well that aligns with their purpose, which is to celebrate the art of living, literally life itself. And one of their key values is to be creative and innovate, and switching over those production lines that quickly to do something like that can save lives, I think is a great example of how their higher purpose transcends the desire for profit. And there's a couple other lesser known examples here that I've run across in the last couple of weeks. Bednarc, which is a fabrication company located in the Can-Do Brooklyn Navy Yard. That phrase of the Can-Do Brooklyn Navy Yard starting to come back now. These guys normally manufacture custom signage and interiors, architectural interiors for companies like Google and Heineken. Their purpose is to push the limits of what's possible. Well, in response to New York City government putting out a request, the CEO of the company flipped their entire business model in 72 hours and began manufacturing face shields for frontline medical workers using the same processes and materials they already had on hand for their architectural work. The city's ordered 120,000 of these shields already, and I think that pretty dramatically illustrates their ability to push the limit, right, to live their purpose. Another example is DataBank, which is a customer of mine at BrandFoundations. It's a data center company whose mission is to take the worry out of managing mission critical IT infrastructures. And that's something that's never been more important than today, when so many companies are going online and relying on all of these digital systems. And since customers in a lot of cases, because of travel restrictions, can't get to the data center to work on their equipment, data bank staff is serving as their remote hands in these facilities, removing one more worry that those overburdened IT teams might have as they're trying to keep their systems up and running for all their employees. So higher purpose is, we're seeing it. Companies are starting to come around to it. We're seeing dramatic evidence of it in people's response to the pandemic. The second tenet is servant leadership, a leadership style that focuses on the greater good, the we as opposed to the me. And I believe we are seeing some great examples of this in recent weeks among folks like Governor Cuomo, Dr. Fauci, even Jay Powell at the Fed, people who are speaking very plainly and effectively to all Americans and encouraging our better angels with decency and respect for the common good. It's my hope that this crisis will allow us to reconnect with and really appreciate that notion of leadership, not only in these individuals that we see on TV, but also in the institutions that we have now been very dramatically and suddenly reminded that we rely on. Government itself, scientific experts, teachers, small businesses. While skepticism of these institutions isn't going to disappear overnight, perhaps we can at least begin to agree that there's a legitimate leading role for them in society, and we can't simply dismiss them out of hand, which has been sort of the trend of late. So I see some great evidence of that, and hopefully that will change people's perception and change the way we look at leadership, how we think about it. Conscious culture is the third tenet of conscious capitalism. And Peter Drucker is famous for supposedly having once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that we are experiencing that truism in real time. No company had a strategy for this pandemic going into it or in advance of it. Nobody planned for that. But some companies will have, and some organizations will have, a sort of cultural immune system, so to speak, that will allow them to overcome it, to survive it. And their commitment to transparency and people and fairness will foster loyalty and effort in the darkest of times. And it will attract and retain the best people and foster a sense of shared sacrifice, so that on the backside of this crisis, these companies are going to be even stronger. And at a macro level, I think we're seeing this in our culture at large too. There's a renewed focus on the common good and self-sacrifice. I'm sure we see plenty of evidence of people hoarding going on, as Jeff mentioned, overcharging, price gouging for things. But I see just as much cooperation among people and sensitivity and compassion as shops like Trader Joe's and Walmart and others set time aside just for the elderly to come in and shop first, limiting the number of people that can come into stores, limiting the amount of scarce items people can buy. And there's plenty of evidence of grassroots efforts, like one that my wife is involved in, to create handmade masks for frontline medical workers. She's part of an online group that's organizing people from multiple companies. Sometimes they're competitors. They're banding together. Some are sourcing the cloth and material. Some are cutting it in different size patterns. Some are sewing it like she is. We have a whole production line going on in the other room. Other people are identifying the hospital contacts and organizing the shipping. So it seems to me that our country, not just our companies, but the country at large, are beginning to turn towards a more conscious form of culture that is the hallmark of this movement. And so that bodes well. And finally, there's this last tenet of conscious capitalism, multi-stakeholder orientation. And I talked earlier about how nature kind of rebalances and heals itself. Well, our free market capitalist system, just like nature, is an interconnected system that can do the same thing. In the 1950s and the 1960s, free market capitalism operated as a balanced ecosystem of stakeholders, such as investors and executives and workers. And that resulted in a very vibrant middle class and unprecedented economic expansion for all of us. But then in 1970, Milton Friedman suggested that a corporation's only responsibility was to a single stakeholder, the investor. And that idea, ever since, has warped the functioning and the balance of this capitalist system. The middle class largely been eviscerated, and our economy resembles sort of like a freakish bodybuilder who only works out their biceps and nothing else. It's unnatural, it's unhealthy, it's not sustainable. And last summer, the Business Roundtable, which is the lobbying group of America's largest corporations, finally acknowledged the error of 50 years of this thinking and embraced a multi-stakeholder perspective. In Conscious Capitalism, that multi-stakeholder orientation suggests that organizations need to make their decisions, especially the large strategic ones that affect a lot of people, with an approach that balances the interests of all of the stakeholders, not just the investors, but also employees and their families, partners, the public, the environment, and even competitors. They are all part of a critical interwoven ecosystem, and it can't survive indefinitely if we sacrifice one or any set of stakeholders at the expense of others. And we're seeing evidence of this everywhere right now, accelerated as a result of the pandemic. There are executives every day in the news who are foregoing their salary so that employees can receive bonuses or continue to get paid. I see companies implementing, when they can, across the board pay cuts rather than letting staff go. Obviously, there's some industries where you can't do that, but there is some evidence of it. We see how quickly the whole conversation in the nation has changed from tax cuts to massive stimulus efforts, paid sick leave, living wages, even universal basic income, stuff that 2 years ago seemed unthinkable. So how we choose to address these imbalances and how we choose to restructure the system remains to be seen, but there is undeniably, I think, a widespread and growing recognition that the system does need to be restructured, and we need to pay greater attention to all of our stakeholders. And that's evidence of this movement accelerating as well. So, just to close out here, and then open it up to some Q&A. Obviously, this pandemic has been devastating and will continue to be. We haven't seen the worst of it. There are going to be darker days ahead. But I do think it's possible to see glimpses of how this crisis could change us for the better and force us to pause and to reassess our lives and reset our priorities and live in a more compassionate manner, mindful of the common good. Will we revert to our old ways? Very possible. And if so, it's probably likely that the next crisis will be even worse. But if we start building upon these changes that are being forced upon us today, individually and collectively, if we embrace a more conscious system of capitalism, we might be better prepared the next time and leave the world in a better place than we inherited it. And as we've all been told, for years, the Chinese character for crisis is one part danger and one part opportunity. Well, it seems to me that the danger is immediately in front of us. It's here right now. No one can miss it. And we have to look a little further over the horizon to see the opportunity, but it's there. And if we listen and we make some tough choices and build on the toughest changes we have to go through right now, I think it's possible. So with that, just want to thank everybody and kind of open it up to any Q&A we've got. What do you see as the best ways to advance conscious capitalism's ideas during and after the pandemic? What do you plan to do, and how do you think other people in the business can be doing it? So it's a good question. We actually have at noon today our first Conscious Capitalism NYC town hall, where we are gathering the community together to discuss just exactly that. What can we do as a community? How can we support each other? What role can we play? This is a global movement. So there's a national organization that was supposed to be having its annual conference next week here in New York City, actually. That has been pushed to a virtual conference. So that will continue to go forward at the national level. We are a very event-driven local chapter. So a lot of what we've done is local events. And those are obviously not happening in person now. So we're reassessing how we do that going forward. But I do think that the principles of the movement hold true. And some of those examples that I shared, I think will help people begin to think about, how do I run my business? Obviously, there's certain financial realities of how we all operate. But I continue to be struck by how people's compassion, their ability to look beyond the dollar can guide us in how we react to it. Another question here: do you think that shareholders and companies will tolerate less profit in favor of employment? That's a good question. The market's reacted obviously pretty dramatically, but it's interesting. In the last couple of days, when you've seen each day that there's been huge unemployment numbers, you actually see some of the market kind of going up. And I think people know, look, we're stepping into an environment where there's tremendous amounts of money that's going to be pushed out there to help people. We're all going to end up paying for that in one way, shape, or form. Shareholders can't reign supreme. And look, at the end of the day, every company has a choice. You can operate in a way with a really short-term focus just to keep your stock up and appease those who that's all they care about. Or we can rethink who our investors are, and we can take the short-term hit of people selling our stock and getting out who don't believe that there's a longer-term value. And I guarantee you, if that happens, you will have other investors, and you stand by your principles. Other investors will come in that will buy that stock because of what you believe in. So there's an opportunity there. Another question here: can institutional investors who have a legal imperative to maximize return get on board with conscious capitalism? Yes, I think they absolutely can. I think that's why you're seeing organizations like the business conference boards and others recognize that you can't simply have a single-minded focus. It's not sustainable to just pay attention to the shareholder. And you're also starting to see at the government level, the policy level, organizations, or basically the government saying, we want to measure and see how organizations are contributing on these other levels beyond just profit. So I think even institutionally, we're starting to, at the policy level, put things in place that will help companies actually focus on more than just their shareholder. Will this conscious capitalism be different? Bring different kinds of competition? Yeah, I mean, I think already we see that people look at when you take a systemic or stakeholder perspective, competitors are key to that ecosystem, just like everybody else. If you have monopoly, that's not healthy. So we see examples of co-opetition. We see companies banding together. I think it'll change the nature of competition. I think companies will find ways to band together and to survive together. Obviously, there's always going to be competition but it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And I think that an event like this that shakes everybody, where everybody's touched, everybody knows somebody who's gotten sick or who's died or lost their job or gone bankrupt or whatever, it provides context that, it's not just about winning the game, so to speak. And so somebody else had a question up there about Simon Sinek's Infinite Game. It's about how do we all advance together. There is no end point. You don't win in business. There's no end point at which it ends. It's a continuous game. And I believe in that. I love that book and I love that mentality. So I think with that, I know we're at the bottom of the hour, we're at the top of the hour. So thank you so much.